Hey everyone, it's David here with VGXP, and welcome to the Trenches VR experience. I'm here to give you some of my thoughts on the game after beating it, and hopefully I can help you decide whether you should actually consider picking this one up or not. Right off rip, Trenches VR is a pretty unique experience. It was originally released as a flat screen game back in 2023, but it's now been re-released in VR for PCVR, MetaQuest 2 and 3, and hopefully soon PSVR 2. Now, I've been playing a review copy on PCVR, and the following footage was all captured running on a 7900 XTX. Don't worry, this is going to be a spoiler-free review, but since it's such a short game, I might be showing just a few jump scares here and there just to reinforce some of my points. Really, most of them are randomized, and they happen multiple times across the game, so there's really nothing that's going to spoil your experience here. I've got pretty mixed feelings about this one. I'm a sucker for psychological horror games, and this one advertises itself as that, but I'd actually disagree. I'd say it's more of a traditional horror experience, set in a creepy atmosphere, but it's filled with cheap and honestly kind of annoying jump scares. Here's the premise. Or at least how I understood it. You play as a World War I soldier trapped in the trenches, trying to escape a grotesque monster while searching for these weird, bloody baby dolls that are scattered throughout a maze-like map. And yeah, that sounds weird. That's because it is. But it's also kind of cool. The setting felt fresh, especially in VR, and I did appreciate getting something that wasn't just another haunted house or another forest. That said, I wouldn't go into this one expecting much of a story. The gameplay is more like a roguelike. Most of the actual lore comes from pages you find across the map, usually notes or old photos of soldiers, and while that does add a little immersion, it doesn't really deepen the narrative that much. Also, I never find reading in VR very fun at all, and the text boxes were always slightly off-centered, so I'd really have to rely on my peripheral vision, which got pretty uncomfortable fast. It's a small annoyance, but again, the story isn't really what's driving this game forward anyway. And I actually managed to beat the game on my very first run. There's basically only one way to die, and that's by getting caught by the stalker-like monster that's constantly hunting you. But with a good pair of headphones, it was honestly pretty easy to hear where it came from, and to just avoid it. Once I picked up on the sound cues, I could really just exploit its pathing. So clocking in at about an hour of gameplay, it did leave me feeling quite underwhelmed. Like I'd seen really everything there was to see in just that short time. Looking at the gameplay, Trenches VR actually has quite a few systems that both help and hurt it. The sound design, for example, plays a huge role. The monster tracks you based on sounds you make. Walking on wooden floors, dropping items, even breathing too loudly can all attract the monster. But one of the coolest features is the option to enable your microphone, which lets him hear you in real life. If you shout, gasp, it's gonna react, and yeah, I learned that the hard way. The slightest noise can send it sprinting towards you, which definitely ups the tension. And if you've played games like Don't Scream before on the flat screen, you should kind of know what to expect. But once I realized that a hiding was 100% effective, the tension kind of faded. You can make as much noise as you want near a hiding spot and still be totally safe. There's also this whistle mechanic. You blow a whistle to locate missing children by following the direction of their cries, as weird as that sounds. It's a clever idea, but again, since you could just duck into a hiding spot right after, it ends up making you feel kind of invincible. So while it's spooky at first, it becomes more of a rhythm. You blow the whistle, you hide, and then you just move on, and the fear slowly gives way to repetition. I also ran into quite a few bugs, especially early on. I wouldn't call this a very polished experience. Like in the first 10 minutes, I was noticing gun magazines clipping through my gun frame, doors popping off their hinges and sending me through the floor, and my backpack inventory suddenly breaking entirely. Every time I opened it, the screen would go black, rendering it useless. It meant I basically completed the whole game without ever using it. Nothing was totally game breaking, but the issue stacked up enough to make the experience slightly frustrating. I also noticed that enabling shadows would nearly half my frame rate, dropping it down from a stable 120 FPS on a 7900 XTX to about 70. These shadows didn't seem ray traced, so I'm assuming that this was a bug that needs to be ironed out. The shadows didn't really add much to the visual experience either, so I just figured I'd keep them off. There are a few other tools in the game. You can slow down the monster by shooting it, though on my first run I never found a gun and honestly never felt like I needed one. The hiding spots were much more reliable. You also get chalk for making paths you've already explored. Cool in concept, but didn't get lost enough to bother. The knife though was quite the standout. Occasionally you'll find paths blocked by barbed wire, but with the knife you can just cut right through it, creating shortcuts around the trenches. Some wires take longer to saw than others, and those moments, hearing the monster's footsteps get louder as you're desperately trying to cut through, those were easily the most intense parts of the whole experience, and I still remember them now. Honestly, that tool alone carried most of my engagement. Between good headphones and the knife, I felt like I had everything I needed without really exploring any of the other tools available. Now, the big question, is it actually scary? To that I'd say it's kind of. If I had to compare it to something, I think the easiest comparison to make would be to something like Slender Man. That same kind of ambient tension, where you're always being watched but rarely surprised. Except here you're exploring claustrophobic trenches instead of this dark forest, which adds a good sense of atmosphere. The stalker enemy, while it works well, the AI certainly isn't brilliant, and the sound design does quite a bit of the heavy lifting to keep things suspenseful. But where it falls apart for me is the jump scares. They're constant, like clockwork every 30 seconds, and they quickly become predictable. You'll walk by sandbags and suddenly they'll launch into the air and slam down, boom, jump scare. You'll turn a corner, find yourself clipping through the ghost of a woman, boom, jump scare. You'll open a door and it'll explode like a C4 charge went off, boom, jump scare. And after a while, it stops being scary and just becomes noise. And I get what they were going for. They were trying to trigger the player into making noise so that the monster reacts. But by the halfway point, the only noise that I was actually making was sighing after my third floating sandbag. And to the developers' credit, they seemed to be listening. Even during my review period, several patches were pushed out, adding things like seated and standing modes. I'd still like to see a dedicated crouch button though, because having to physically crouch every time you hide or crawl under barbed wire can be awkward, and I'd imagine a bit inaccessible for some players. But the fact that the devs are actively updating gives me hope that this experience will improve over time. When I look at the full package, Trenches VR feels like the kind of game you'd play at Halloween get-together with friends. Short, chaotic, and filled with cheap jump scares that are more silly than frightening after a while. It doesn't really build a story or have a deep psychological horror element, but it does deliver that initial jolt of adrenaline. And for a short, 1-hour session, that might be exactly what some players want. But if you're planning on playing it solo, hoping for something, thought-provoking or atmospheric, this probably isn't that game. But here, we're going to try and rate this game on an experience scale from broken to unforgettable. The biggest factor being how much fun I actually had while I was playing the game. Overall, I'd call it a decent experience. Not something I'd personally replay, but something I'd recommend picking up on sale if you just want some spooky VR fun. It's got some cool ideas and creepy vibe, but the jank and the short runtime really hold it back. If you find it on a good sale, it's worth a night of VR horror fun. And at $15, it's about where it should be, if the devs keep patching it up. But for now, I'd say hold on to your money and see how it evolves. But that's going to be it for now. If you got any questions about Trenches VR, I'd love to answer them in the comments below. And if you like this video, please consider subscribing. We're working hard to bring you more content just like this on a regular basis. Have a great day, everyone. I'll catch you next time. See ya!